Okay, very good. So welcome everyone. Students taking DA 2200. Today we'll be having a special engaged teaching workshop on the art and science of breathing. Okay, and also welcome to all of our guests who are not taking the class but joining us via lecture. We really welcome you both physically, three-dimensionally, and also on Zoom. Hi everyone on Zoom. So I am Cindy Sinmukau. I'm an assistant professor in Human Centered Design. I'm also the director of the Hybrid Body Lab. And I'm very excited today through this opportunity and with support from our department's Engage Teaching Grant to talk about the art and science of weaving electronic textiles. So before we jump in, oh, you're clicking? Okay, very good. So first, I want to give a brief overview of the Hybrid Body Lab. So we are a research lab that focuses on the invention of materials, processes, and tools for crafting technology on and into the body surface. Okay, and so we are very interested in the design, engineering, and also study of soft and conformable interfaces. They're often situated on the body surface, but they also have a lot of applications, right, that can go on different scales of the human experience. And we're really a team of people that come from all different disciplines. You will hear today from one of our PhD students, Jingwen Zhu. She has a background in product design. We have folks coming from computer science and also physics, chemical engineering, material science, and also interaction design, fashion design, etc. So I think it really, I love to teach this course, art and science, because I think it really brings together and offers an avenue for us to think about the importance, right, of using art and science to solve some of the most challenging issues facing our planet today. We are a STEM research lab. So I think we can have the next slide, please. We are a research lab focused on the engineering, right, and science of these devices. And we often, from my own personal experience in doing this type of work, I've really benefited from being able to work with artists, and especially artists that are experts in on-body design. So this includes apparel designers, fiber artists, fashion designers. So here's just some photos of artists that I've had the opportunity to collaborate with in my research projects throughout the years. And this is what really, led me to start creating the Hybrid Body Lab Artists in Residence as an opportunity to engage more artists. And I think I'll just very quickly talk about this because I think it's also an interesting example, right, of the collaboration, a different mode of collaboration between art and science. So next slide, please. So in 2022, we had our first artist residence, who was Morgan Chen. So Morgan Chen, she is a special FXX makeup artist. So you can see her, this is actually Morgan herself wearing her own makeup, okay? And so she came to our research lab and she became very interested, next slide please, in using the shape memory alloy actuator technology that we've developed that were integrated into on-skin patches to create this artwork called social prosthetics. I highly encourage you to check this out on our lab website. There's a lot more details, and Morgan also documented this process so that anyone who's interested can also create their own social prosthesis device. Next slide, please. Last summer, we had the good fortune of hosting Joe George, who was a tattoo artist based in Brooklyn. I recommend you to follow him on social media. His IG is here. He is a minor celebrity on Instagram. And it was very interesting for us to be able to work with George. And in his project, next slide, next slide, please. Leverage some of our technology in environmental on-skin sensors and also creating textures on the skin. So he created this snake skin that can change color to show elevated levels of UV to inform the wearer. Okay, so I think it was a very, very also interesting and eye-opening collaboration for us. Next slide, please. And so this year, we're currently in the process of reviewing and selecting our next artists. And so, yeah, please keep posted in this space. And again, all of these projects and the technologies that they use from our lab, we make them all open source. So I think the intent is really to enable more artists to be able to build things with integrated technology, especially on the skin surface. Next slide, please. And so today we will be also talking about this vein of collaboration between the art and sciences and engineering. However, through the specific lens of a lot of our lab's workshops in which we engage with textile artists. So what happened, as you can see in this diagram, is that the researchers in our lab, we would often develop novel materials, fabrication approaches, and techniques, right, to create technology very close to the body, okay? We would then invite textile artists to either come to our lab, or sometimes we would actually ship them these materials, okay? We would then hold workshops, right, to teach them how to use these novel types of on-skin and textile fabrication techniques. We would then invite them to integrate these new technical scientific engineering approaches into these existing artistic practices, okay? And so I think today we're very, very fortunate to have invited 4 artists. One of them is here, so Julia Wright, and we have 3 joining us via Zoom. We will be introducing each of them in a little bit, and they are each of them, they are amazing textile artists, designers in their own right. And I, again, recommend to follow them on Instagram, etc. They are they post very exciting information on their work. They have all either came to our lab or we shipped them materials, and they actually built something, okay, with the technology developed by our lab. And today, what will happen next is I will first hand over the mic to my PhD student, Jingwen Zhu. So Jingwen has developed a suite of projects relevant to woven e-textile interfaces. So Jingwen is first going to talk about 2 of her projects relevant to woven e-textiles. And these are also 2 projects that we then engage these textile artists to come in and actually build something with. Okay, and so Jiwon, I'll hand over the mic to you, and I can help you advance the slides. You just let me know. Very good.
Hi everyone, Jingwen. I'm a 3rd-year PhD student in human-centered design, and I work at Hybrid Body Lab and working on e-textile and on skin interfaces research. So today I want to share 2 projects that in the process, I collaborated with artists. And this is the first one. It's called Skin Paper, exploring woven paper on skin interfaces. So the idea is that we use very accessible materials like washi paper, waterproof spray, etc., to turn the paper into a waterproof and functional surface that we can work with as a substrate material or as a functional material. So we integrate conductive traces or thermochromic pigments on top of the paper traces. And on the right side, you can see an example of what Julia created during this workshop study, where we invited weavers, not only a textile weaver, but also people who work in basket weaving or all kinds of different mixed material weaving, and come to our lab to use the material and to weave their own swatches within a very short amount of time, as paper material itself is very easy to work with. And the next project I would talk about is called eco-threads. The idea is that we are developing biodegradable functional threads that can be further integrated into e-textile. So the biodegradability is enabled through using biomass as a binder material, for example, chitosan from shrimp shell, or sodium alginate from seaweed. We also incorporate a lot of biodegradable conductive materials, such as carbon nanotubes that can break down in a certain microorganism environment, or silver nanowires that's actually dissolvable in water. So combining these materials, we were able to use wet spinning and coating method to fabricate the threads and then integrate them into swatches for all kinds of sensing and actuating functions. So after all the artists introduce their artwork, we will let them talk about what they created in this workshop study. So now we will meet the panelists.
You wanna go ahead?
So first guest panelist is Victoria. And Victoria, can you say hi? And
Hey, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Anne and Jingwen. It's been a pleasure to collaborate, even in a small way, on this project with you all. Should I just introduce myself briefly? Is there anything in particular?
yes, please. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so these are some images of my woven work. I've explored electronic textiles using fiber optics in collaboration with Nicole, who is also here. On the previous slide, maybe I could go back to my other slide. Is a preview of what's to come, I suppose. Yeah, here. I've also played around with weaving tubes through which I've have a liquid moving through, which is a collaboration with Julian Goldman, who's an industrial designer. And then I've also utilized different kinds of looms, including a jacquard, which was used to make the images in the middle, as well as a jack loom in a more simple structure, which is the photograph on the right. A lot of the work that I'm doing is interested in the ways that textiles and technology can intersect, but looking both to the past as well as to the future of technology. And my collaborator, Nicole, who you'll meet in a moment, we work on lots of different projects together.
Hi, my name's Nicole.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
go
let's
ahead.
have a next guest panelist, Nicole, who's also collaborating with Victoria. You could go ahead and then talk about your work and also craft work.
Sure. Hi, my name's Nicole. Thanks for having me. I'm a creative technologist and textile artist, also working across technology and textiles. I would consider myself more of a generalist on the textile and work across different mediums. The pictures here showcase some projects that I've worked on collaboratively with Craftwork. On the left, you'll see Ancient Futures, which is a woven textile embedded with fiber optics that reflects stories through light. And then in the middle, there's a woven textile where we're taking digital renderings of different graphics and exploring how they look in textiles and tying kind of digital textures back to their computational roots in textiles. And then I also have done a lot of exploration with RFIDs and RFID systems on the body and how we can explore that mode of technology as a new way of interacting with spaces in the world through on-body interaction. You can go to the next slide. So Victoria and I have a studio called Craftwork, and we're a design and art studio kind of working at the intersection of textiles and technology, specifically focused on storytelling, material-based research, and installations. We're really interested in working with textiles because we're often trying to find ways to make electronics more diverse and expressive through the blending of both technology and textiles. Go to the next slide.
So here you can see some more images of some of the work that we've been doing. We're currently in the process of creating a documentary film about knitting machines. We make large-scale installations and objects, including ancient futures, which you just saw some images of. And then we're also doing our own research, playing with materials and trying to figure out what they can do, pushing the possibilities, playing around with electronics, textiles, and all kinds of other forms of technology and craft.
Thank you so much, Nicole and Victoria. And now we'll move on to Hinata, who is also a designer and artist working in multidisciplinary research and in textiles.
Okay, let me try and find Renata.
Oh, yeah.
Let me know when I can give my intro. You found me? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Hinata. I'm an artist, designer, and a little bit of a creative technologist as well. Work full time as a designer, but in my personal practice, I try to leverage technology in order to talk about women's identity and how can we use technology to empower people. I also am really fond of experimenting. So some of these works here, especially the ones on the right, they are both born out of collaborations. The top one with Jingwen when we had a fellowship together where we're experimenting conductive threads and knitting, industrial knitting. And then at the bottom, this was a collaboration with a German weaver, Maria Raquel, where she was actually teaching me how to weave on a floor loom. And we just started playing around with materials. Like, I really think that what makes me excited about doing these projects is the ability of testing on materials, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, seeing what's going to break, how far you can get them to break, and so on. And on the left, you can see some images of some work that it's more performative. The top left is a elbow patch that it was a concept to see if you could predict how cyclists work and how they behave prior to like turning left and right and having this like little like funny little tail kind of wagging if you were to turn left or right. And then on the bottom was a performance called In the Silence of My Lonely Room, where I build all these like wearable instruments that they would manipulate sound. And if you go to the next slide, I also would like to mention that I have a collaboration with Francesca Rodriguez Sawaya. It's a project called Weaving and Coding. And the main thing that we're working here is to demystify both computing and programming and textile techniques in general and seeing where they overlap and how we can leverage that overlap. It all kind of started as a workshop where we teach people basic programming through p5.js, which is a JavaScript library made for artists, and basic weaving on this very small frame loom. It has been really fun to host them around. We've done also some artist talks and so on. And then that kind of led us to a more curatorial practice. So on the right of the slide, you can see two images of two different exhibitions that we've done. The middle one is an exhibition that happened in Santa Fe in a gallery called Form Concept. It's called Beyond Punch Cards. So we curated work that were really talking about that intersection of textile techniques, textile themes, and new technology, whatever that might mean to the artist. And on the right, this was an exhibition commissioned by the Gottesman Library at Columbia University. It's called Warping the Future. It's an online exhibition where we were trying to tell the history of computing through textile objects. So part of that, especially because this was in 2020, was about bringing the gallery experience into people's homes. So all these objects were available in augmented reality. And it's really nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Hinata. And now let's hand the mic over to our guest in person, Julia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Julia Wright. I am a textile artist. I've been weaving for about 10 years. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and my day work is a little bit deeper than on skin interface. I work on examples of things that are permanent implants into the body, all woven or knitted. So there's some examples here of heart valves on this bottom row, bone tethering, and other kind of implantable meshes. And kind of an example of the way that I work through this process is on over here. I'm confused which side is left. I guess it'll be the left side. The example kind of shows some different types of materials that I work with, such as collagen yarn, resorbable yarn, and yarn that's as strong as steel, ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. So this is kind of a funny thing to go from art school to biomedical engineering. But it's been really fun to work with the hybrid body lab and kind of think about interesting ways of bringing this kind of full circle, kind of uniting the two pieces of myself, which is on the next slide. This is my own personal practice. I have a weaving studio at South Hill Business Center. Anyone in Ithaca is welcome to come by. And I have a computer programmable Dobby loom. So I have some images of kind of the ways that I work through programming on my loom, and some pieces on the side that I'm working on presenting. I have some shows coming up this year, so you can follow me and see where they are. But it's been really fun to kind of work through weaving in these two different ways, and then also get to work with Jingwen on these fun projects and new materials. It's nice to meet everyone.
So now we'll just go to the some work of swatches that all our guest panelists created with the EcoThread biodegradable functional thread project. And I will let everyone just briefly talk about what they created, what's their thought behind using this new material, or if it's like anything new they learned or anything interesting they observed in this small, interesting experiment that we did as a workshop study. So I guess we'll start with Ananta.
And do you want to just recap what project it is for
yeah.
some people joining late?
So for people joining late, EcoThread is a project we explore using biodegradable functional materials to spin or modify fiber to achieve biodegradable functional E-Textiles. So the function includes sensing, actuating, such as like heating, capacitive touch, sensing, or like color changing in reaction to pH level change or temperature change, etc. So in this workshop study, we prepare the materials and we ship them to our guest panelists, all the participants here, and to invite them to use it to create a small swatch using their familiar tools, materials in their studio space. And for the collaboration with Julia, I delivered in person to her studio. And so this is the, we try to explore how artists and e-textile practitioners use this material in their own studio settings, in their own practice. So I will hand over to Hinata to talk about her creation.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really fun to be invited to this one, especially because I feel like more recently I've been thinking a lot about the costs and like environmental costs as well of like all the prototyping that we do, especially doing textiles and electronics. So it was really exciting to see all the stuff that you're learning and you know, finding out and making in the lab. So when you were introducing all the materials, I immediately thought about how can we think of like textile as this like prototyping surface? How can we leverage the fact that these are all like very flexible materials, and like finding the limits as well? I think at some point when I was testing out, I realized that like certain threads would like have more two-dimensional flexibility rather than others. And then I was just really trying to play basic things, and I decided that I wanted to do a very small like prototyping board. If anyone has done any electronic prototyping, you probably have seen the little breadboards. So that was kind of where I was going with. And with the LED being layered with the wet spun alginate, I was trying to create some diffusion on the light. So when we were talking about it, I was thinking, oh, maybe this could be some sort of like signaling that like it could be like a one-time use that you would also like feel less guilty of using all these materials because they would all like eventually, you know, they are biodegradable. They would eventually go back to being used in other ways. So that's kind of what I had when I was thinking about this one.
Thank you for sharing. And next we will talk about Julia's project.
So I live in Ithaca, and as you know, it is cold here in the winter, and I love a spa moment. So when Jingwen was telling me about this project, the first thing I thought of was I want to make a heated rock pocket. Just something that you can kind of maybe keep in your pocket or hold in your hand and warm up. So I went to Ithaca Falls and I got a squarish rock. And we had a good time on one of my smaller looms in my studio, weaving this kind of pocket, double weave pocket, with the heated element on the face of it. And yeah, I think the material itself is so intriguing, being that it's biodegradable, but also capable of powering all sorts of different things you can do with textiles. I think it's really cool. So as you can see over here, that's the kind of, you can see the trace of the heat, which it did work, which is really exciting. And it's, you know, I haven't done as much work with E-Textiles, so working with the lab has been really fun on these projects. And yeah, it was a nice warm little rock.
Now we'll move on to next the project created by Victoria and Nicole. And also to give everyone context, this workshop studies done in about the actual fabrication time is at about like 2.5 hours. So it's really like small scale swatch. So you can see that we are like experimenting with materials, and the goal is not to create like a full like art piece, just so you know. So next, Victoria, could you talk about this blanket?
Yeah, thank you. I had so much fun with this project as a weaver, as a natural dyer, and as someone who, of course, loves food, but likes exploring food as like a storytelling tool in my work. So here I was weaving with the different pH sensing yarns that the lab that Jingwen has been designing. So I decided to make the textile sort of like a sampler. So the different stripes include different of those threads, each with their different capacities. And Jingwen, I'm sure you could speak more eloquently about the differences between those yarns that you've spun. I did some tests with the material that you sent me, and then I can see that you did some tests when I sent the weaving back to you. But yeah, it was interesting. It made me think as an artist and as a designer about the different ways that I could utilize that material. The warp yarn is a tencel, which is also kind of an interesting material for us to think about in the context of this. It was a coincidence, some yarn I already had on my loom, but I was happy to use it for this project, just to explore all kinds of natural, synthetic, manufactured, and sustainable materials in weaving.
Last but not least, Nicole, please talk about the crochet project you created.
Yeah, nice to see everyone's projects. I liked working with the eco threads because it was really, you know, thinking about textiles as building blocks as we're doing things on different scales, both from prototyping to industrial, and then, you know, exploring how we can think about more sustainable ways to include textiles, such as biomaterials. But I was interested in making stretch sensors, specifically with crochet. I think oftentimes when you think about e-textiles, you're thinking about machines, but trying to use something that can only really be done by hand. I made a few swatches, and I think the biggest thing was like the fineness of the thread made it easier or harder to crochet with it.
Thank you for sharing, and I hope our audience can get a grasp of all the variance of different type of projects and materials to use. And now we will move on to the panel.
Oh, the panel discussion? Okay, great. So next, we will have some panel questions and, so I think it might be good, like, Anne, if you can help us, like, and do what if you wanted to also take a seat so we can discuss together. Very good. Cool. And maybe we can move this, can we make it like horizontal so that, yeah. Okay, very good. So before we jump into our panelist questions, any questions so far from folks in class or on Zoom about these projects and also our panelists and also their practice? Yes, okay. So let's, Anne, can you and speak loud because please come up here actually.
Oh, okay.
To share your question.
Wait, it's a very simple question. It's kind of.
No worries, you want to make sure everyone can hear. Okay, so we'll take, yes, stand here so that people can see you. And introduce yourself, please. Thank you. Okay.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm a human development major, but I'm thinking about minoring in DEA. So this is the second class of Professor House that I've taken. It was kind of a general question for the hybrid body lab. I was curious,
Okay.
Because I know Jingwen mentioned that you're not working towards like creating these finalized products, but working through like iterations and just trying to get stuff just like made. I was curious if you work under that time constraint intentionally to develop these ideas faster without kind of the like self-consciousness in the process, like if you have too much time. Like I was curious if that was an intentional choice in at least these parts of the lab that we're talking about.
Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so and I think maybe our panelists can also speak, but so our role in the hybrid body is we're researchers. So the technologies that we create are as well, we aim for them to be at least like several years out before they can be commercialized. If we're researching a topic that can be commercialized tomorrow, it means it's not novel enough. The paper would not get published. And so our focus is developing these novel types of fabrication approaches, right? That can maybe be used in a lot of different application scenarios and hopefully by different people. And specifically in this panel today, this is a part of our research where we've developed a fabrication process, but we want to do a workshop-based user study to understand how folks from different disciplines, especially artists, is a major community that we try to engage with use our technology to create something. Okay, and typically these workshop studies, they can range. Some of them are, I think we've done studies that are maybe 4 to 5 hours over 2 sessions. There are many different types of forms of user studies. And some of them are 4 to 5 hours. However, I think especially in, I think all of our panelists did projects using echo threads. Because of the intent of the echo threads research project, we're trying to create these biodegradable threads that you can use for swatching, right? Swatching in E-Textiles means you're just creating a quick draft and then you dispose of it, right? And often swatching creates a huge amount of these swatch waste projects because you're just testing certain yarns or certain structures and then you don't need them, right? So we really saw like, I thought that like echo threads would be good for swatch. And this is why we intentionally gave our artists that use our a time constraint. And do you remind me how much time they had? Like,
They had 2.5.
2.5 hours. So these were created under 2. So it's kind of more to mimic like a swatching process where we're testing it, but great question.
Thank you. That was
Very good. Okay. So, and I think, so yes, I'm also quite curious about, maybe we can start with, this first question, here. So what is your understanding of art and science and how do you implement them in your practice? And, feel free to also tie this, if you would like, directly to, maybe the workshop study that you participated, or if in your own general practice, as you also blend art and science and you think about these questions a lot, we would also really welcome that. So, how should we proceed? Who would like to start sharing on our panel? Okay, so Julia, let's have you start because you're a three-dimensional physical. Okay, very good.
That's an interesting question. There's all this STEAM talk these days. And I feel like for me, computation is really interesting. I think weaving is all so much about structure. And I love the idea of putting puzzles together. I think puzzling is super fun, and like thinking about structure in that way is really interesting. I think for my practice being like merging my life as a biomedical engineer and a weaver together, it's interesting to kind of think about that in a larger context, when you have to think about contact surfaces for a material and making sure that that's biocompatible. All sorts of different things, pore size in a woven fabric being good for blood passing through. Like these are like actual things I really have to think about during my day. And the way that they kind of pass through my work in my own practice, I think has been really interesting to kind of think about more and more complex structures and utilizing increasingly more computational tools to be able to make those. So yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot to learn there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Julia. And any of our online panelists would like to share? And feel free to unmute yourself to share your thoughts to this panelist question. Thank you.
I can share my take. What I've been thinking more recently, and I feel like it just had been like part of my practice in general, is that art and science, like I don't necessarily see them as separate things. And what I really enjoy about the process that, I've been building is that like they kind of go hand in hand. And like, if you think about the process, or at least for me, like my process of my art practice, it's like very much about like experimenting and figuring out where things go. And I feel like a lot of like scientific research and knowledge, it's just built also like on this just like constant iteration, right? And like seeing where things go. And I feel that for me, it just like they go very hand in hand. And it's really hard to just kind of say, art is this, science is that. Everything's kind of up to debate until you get new things to be learned, right? So it's really like I feel very inspired on like how the process for both feel very similar and very like embedded into each other. So that's kind of how I end up approaching these two together.
That really resonates with me. I think for art and science as a blend, it's really about process, and in my practice, often having kind of a scientific approach to creating and constantly researching in an iterative manner. They're very like similar research-based driven inquiry practice.
Yeah, I agree very much with what Nicole and Renata have shared. It's interesting to think about technology as a third thing in this question, art, science, and technology. And I spend a lot of time, and at Craftwork, we think a lot about ancient technologies, also ancient sciences, ancient arts, as ways to think about the future ones. The process of investigating those things can often feel make the studio feel like a lab, make the loom feel like a tool more than for creating an object, but for creating a collection of research. And the fact that we did swatch making in the projects that we just spoke about, I think speaks to that, especially craftspeople are really focused on the swatch process. I'm a sucker for a swatch series, and sometimes you don't even really make anything afterwards. It's just the swatch itself that you wanted to create because the research was the exciting part.
Fantastic, thank you. And anything you wanted to add, Jillian?
Yeah, I think one thing I was when it comes to art and sciences topic, I was thinking about is some of observation during these workshop studies, collaborating with artists, is that for like scientific research, we're always looking for consistency results. We're looking for like all the procedure we can repeat and then like have the same outcome, and that means like it's a validated fabrication approach, for example. But in art creation, sometimes we're looking for the variance, the difference, that's something that's abnormal. So that's sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional, but I think that's the interesting, exciting element in art that very often we will forget or like miss when we are only looking at the results in a scientific way. So I feel like and also I feel that kind of like the uniqueness can also contribute back to the science research. So that's my observation.
Okay, fantastic. Now let's head to our next question. And so, yes, I love this question. So our next question for our panelists is, how do you see weaving as an intersection of art and science? And so Julia, would you like to start?
Someone else should.
Someone else, okay. So, any of our online panelists, feel free to unmute, and share. Thank you.
One of the many things I love about weaving is that it's very linear. So of course you have to put the first warp before you can put any of the other warps, and you have to do the warps before you do the weft, and you really have to follow a process. So there does feel in that regard something scientific about it. And if you do one thing wrong, or if one thread snaps, it can affect the entire cloth in the same way that a scientific experiment depends on the quality of every aspect of the investigation. But at the same time, weaving is very artful because you can be spontaneous in ways, and you're making choices with fiber and color and density. So perhaps for those reasons, as something that does feel genuinely scientific and artful, it's a great medium for us to discuss this. I find myself being able to harness a lot of patience when I'm weaving, which I wish I could apply to other parts of my life. And then I also think often about how if I had learned things like weaving or natural dyes or any of these other crafts when I was in science class as a kid, that it may have changed my professional trajectory. Something like weaving is a great way for a certain type of learner to understand physics, for example, or geometry.
You.
At Craftwork, we're doing a lot of investigation of weaving and also weaving like kind of computational drawings. And a question that Victoria and I are often asked, Victoria as the expert weaver and myself as the person doing a lot of the coding, is how do you all have a shared language to talk about things? And I think it's like very seamless for us because weaving is artful, but also there's like, it's incredibly technical, similar to the way that coding is technical. And it's just a very like hybrid discipline.
I can jump in here. Those are both really, they spark a lot of thoughts in my mind, especially what you had said on the last question about ancient technology and like just the development of someone twisting some fibers together and realizing that they could take that and create all of these architectural structures. I think the other thing about shared language and coding too is that the loom was the first coding device. That what you are programming into the loom on a simple binary structure or binary language of thread up or thread down, and sparked all like computation in that way, which is really incredible. And I think also that the creation of a plane of fabric. I remember the very first time I saw my first sample come off the loom, and I touched it and held it, and it was like, wow, this is a three-dimensional thing. Like it's a real thing, and you can really back to what Victoria also said about making choices in material and color and texture, that you can have a lot of determination on the physical properties of that. And you can see how that coincides with all sorts of industries, whether it be biomedical or geotextiles, like textiles that literally hold earth back during landslides or something like that. I used to do that work too. Or like, yeah, automotive textiles, or even like, your pants, and there's a reason why sweaters are knit and pants are woven. So it's always fun.
To add to all that was said already, one thing that I really think about is the weaver that I collaborated and taught me how to weave, Mahia, she once told me that like people think that in order to weave, you need to be very creative, but in fact, you really need to be like good at math and like, following techniques and orders of things and so on. And I really think that if you look at weaving as a creative practice, which we know that goes way beyond that, right? Like it's like such an ancient technology, and it just like it keeps on innovating and so present in our lives. But the fact that you can use weaving as a creative practice, as a way of just like imagining things and being able to just like try things out in the world, I think that also just gives us like possible futures. Like you're looking at like these things that are just experimenting and potentially taking it to places that might lead you to, scientific knowledge and so on. Like one thing that I really love about the history of weaving that kind of led into like a lot of like the automation that we saw in industrial revolution and all is that in Africa, there were these like heddle looms that basically prior to that, the heddles were not part of like the weaving looms in Europe. And once they started bringing that in, you start part of automation of that process. So instead of having the, normally infants or women like pulling each of the threads up and down so that you could have all these like complex patterns, you then start using the heddle, and that helps automating. So like, I really think that there's a lot that like eventually led us to what Julia is saying, like the first algorithm and so on, that really comes from different ways that textile production were born around the world, and how these just, if you have never seen something and you see someone doing a certain technique, or you end up like with a piece that you didn't expect, how that inspires you to create something new. How does that inspire you to potentially think of research and knowledge that can be shared and built upon?
Thank you. So thanks to all the panelists. I think that was for your, I think it's very lovely discussion on the intersection of art and science. And I think just as information for the students in my class and also online, the first, please, any guesses on what the first computer, what is the first computer? Raise your hand, anyone can shout out. Any wild guesses? Yes, what are you thinking? Yes, the loom. Fantastic. Did you guys know that? All of our smartphones that we have, except like it's a computer, like the first computer is actually the Jacquard loom. Okay. We have a Jacquard loom right over there in the room across from us. We will be seeing that. So before the Jacquard loom, right, weaving was done manually, right? The invention of the Jacquard loom, what it brought about was that it could automate the raising of the warps, right? So of the warps. And how did they decide whether to raise or drop a warp, right? They would then, there would be punch cards, right? With either a hole or no hole, indicating 0 or 1, right? Does this sound familiar? Raise your hand if we take an intro to computing in our class, right? So we know the basics, that what forms computers is binary logic, right? 0 and 1. Okay, so this really I think also played a very big role, right, in how our computers are currently developed. And I remember when I was doing my PhD studies at MIT, my advisor, he had been at MIT since I think the 1960s. Okay, and he was retired. He showed me this paper. This I don't know, this roll of paper with a lot of holes in them. Guess what those were? So he said this is actually how people programmed early in the 1960s with the earliest computers. And we can see how that really matches, right? How the Jakarta. So I think it's just I think weaving is just a very fascinating intersection, whether it's historically, right? Or in the practice itself, right? So we can see how a lot of our artists and design technologists are here sharing today, that it really involves also very clear logic, right? And weaving the right thing and weaving a piece of cloth that's not gonna collapse, right? But also the blending of artistic expression. Very good. And so I think we might have some time, I think, for some questions from the audience. And so feel free to, for folks in my class, feel free to raise your hand, share your question. I will repeat the question here directly, so you don't have to run up, okay? Or if any of our audience on Zoom might have questions, feel free to type it in, or even just to unmute yourself. And our Tia Ann can help us monitor that. Very good. Yes.
How do you test how biodegradable something is?
Very good. So I think the question that we got is, how do we test how biodegradable something is? And so I think, Jiwon, do you want to handle this question? Okay, good.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So to understand the material property, it has been done through several steps. The first is like from literature, we can find some source of the material that based on their molecular structure, etc. Like we know that it has certain biodegradability. So that's one thing, is like when we are ideating compatible materials, we're already looking for those that has specific property. And then the next step is actually we actually have to run through certain experiments to deconstruct them under certain conditions. So for example, the alginate yarn, I bury them in the front yard of my home, so I can see them, I dig them out like after 10 days or 20 days to see where they are, like how they decay or destruct throughout the process. So that is also one thing, is like for a lot of practice, not only in like science research or in art, very often you need a theoretical foundation, but at the same time you need the empirical study, you need to do actual experiments, and sometimes the findings are could be exciting or unexpected. So that's also the amazing part of the research.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jiwon. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question for Julia. And I was really curious when you were explaining how you went to the Rhode Island School of Design. And then you kind of shifted your gears towards, more of like a biomedical textile engineering approach. So what was that shift? And like what was going through your mind during that process? I find that really interesting.
Fantastic. And just let me repeat the question for our Zoom audience. So the question we got was for Julia, and I think our audience was very interested in how she started her career in Rhode Island School of Design studying textiles and transitioned into now working in biotechnology textiles. So Julia, mic is yours.
It's a great question. There's no clear answer to that question. I went to art school for textiles, and afterwards I was actually working in the fashion apparel industry, doing print design, and it just wasn't for me. So I kind of took a break from that, and then I managed to kind of change careers, and I went into automotive textiles actually, which kind of the company also did geotextiles. So in that space, we're working on those two sorts of things. And that kind of brought me into this kind of material development space, where I was thinking about how materials are really engineered for specific applications, more so than just, visual aesthetic. And unfortunately, that was during COVID, so I lost that job and I drove across the country by myself because I was in LA, and I moved from Southern California to upstate New York. And yeah, I got contacted for this job through LinkedIn. Make sure you have your LinkedIn's together, everyone. And I really had no idea what I was getting into. It was terrifying. I really had to figure out a lot of stuff on the job, but I think in my professional career, what I've realized is that there really is this space that is lacking of people who have innate fundamental understanding of woven structures and knit. I mean, I also do knitting. And they were having a really hard time finding someone who could think on all of those levels. And I think a lot about, materials can change, but I can kind of think forwards and backwards. I have the input of what, our biomedical customers want, and I can kind of work backwards. Okay, they want this much yarn in the warp. They want this width. They want this thickness. There's this amount of tolerance. I can kind of work backwards and forwards, and like everyone's been talking about, a lot of experimentation. So I've learned a lot in the past 3 years that I've been doing that. And it's not like I set out after graduating from receiving, like, I'm gonna be a biomedical textile engineer. Absolutely not. This just landed in my lap, and I'm grateful that it happened like that. But I just think there's a lot of space that people don't necessarily realize that is accessible to people who just have real material knowledge for something. So yeah, it's been interesting also to bring that into my own practice, because I do take my art practice really seriously. And I'm working on shows. I'm trying to like do that as well, kind of like parallel path those things. And I'm sure that something else will come up in the future, and I won't, I'll kind of follow that lead. But I think the through line for me really is just the interest in structure and my love of puzzles. So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was beautiful. Any questions from our online audience? Very good. Aviv, do you want to maybe unmute and share your question directly? Thank you.
Yeah. It's kind of like a lofty question, but I feel like art and technology are pretty institutional spaces, pretty institutional practices. And I think what Hybrid Body Lab does, which is interesting, is pull in like things like weaving and like fabric, which, albeit exists in super commercial like capacities, like fast fashion or something, but also is very much associated with like folk art and like more commonly existing forms of art. So I was just wondering if you guys have any like thoughts or stories to share of just like how you guys have been navigating that space. And yeah, like, do you find that maybe through weaving you experience a sort of like making art and technology feel more accessible, or like make through weaving these things feel like less daunting or less exclusive or insular or something?
I'd say that the craft world has always been so open to collaboration and avoided gatekeeping, at least more so than many of the other creative fields. So it does, to your question, feel like weaving does feel like a really nice way to share knowledge, because there's just this long history of it being a shared craft. In many aspects of the process, you need somebody else to help you. And I appreciate about that it gives us a chance to think more about the ways that things are made most often in collaboration. And the idea of a solo artist or a solo craftsperson is mostly a myth. And therefore, if we embrace the idea that things are made together, hopefully we can embrace the idea that things should be shared and created in such a way that they're accessible to a variety of learners.
Yeah, part of my practice, as I was talking, like the collaboration with Francesca on the weaving coding, is about making all of this accessible, and most of it came from experiencing, firsthand how the tech world in general has this like very default way of gatekeeping knowledge and making things more complicated than you need to, and so on, and how to what Victoria said, like the crafting community in general is much more open by default to like share knowledge and collaborate and so on. So maybe it might be worth you look at what we've done, because it's really about just like sharing out the knowledge around these two practices and where the overlap, and how we can make it very simple that like anyone can feel like, okay, I can access this, I can understand what's happening, and hopefully that inspire people to do whatever they want, like don't feel like they need to be limited by knowledge they want, or if they feel like they're intimidated by how knowledge is presented, right? I think that's like the main thing for me and my collaborator, like it's how knowledge has been presented, especially from like the tech world, and how you can learn both practices at the same time, and that helps you like really understand and improve whatever skills you want to improve by learning the two at the same time.
Fantastic. Well, I think we are also at time. So let's please thank all of our amazing panelists again for sharing their work and also their insight. We will be also providing links to their Instagram and their the websites to their personal practices, and I highly recommend you guys, everyone, to check it out. And also this summer, we will be running more workshops, and I think one will be in collaboration with the Tompkins County Public Library, using also sustainable materials. So anyone interested, please we'll be announcing news on our lab Instagram and also our social media. And also next semester, so fall in New York City, we will also be running a workshop inviting E-Textile practitioners to our colleges. We have an office space, a workshop space around, I think, Lexington Avenue. And so we would love for all of our artists to come visit us, and also for anyone else to also join us. And so thanks everyone for joining. And it was wonderful to have you all. Thank you very much.